maybe online tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a number right here.
Yeah, let's sit over here together. You have a presentation, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't see. Too long a meeting.
What slides are what this time?
Member, part of it, lead the group.
I don't know. I don't see why not though. And I'm sure Mr. Councilor Baker will be here, I'm sure.
Hello, how are you? John's not here.
So then it goes to John is here. But if he wasn't, then it would go to either someone that they have named to resign in their absence. And if they haven't, it would be the longest serving counselor.
Yeah, that's what
That makes sense.
If two are the same, then it goes by age.
Declan, are we live and ready to go?
Just give me a brief moment to get us up and going.
Recording in progress.
We're all set.
Good evening, those of you here and those of you online. This is a regularly, or I should put it irregularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee, being the month of July, when we traditionally have one meeting a month. Present at the start of the meeting, myself, Lyle Baker, chair of the committee, and Councilor Rena Getz from Ward 5, also joined as not a member of the committee, but welcome Steve Farrell, the ward councilor from Ward 8, and joined online by members of the committee, Councilor Susan Albright, Councilor John Oliver, the vice chair. I believe we are also joined by our eminent land use chair and Andrea Kelly. And let's see who else is here from the committee. And then the Planning and Development Board, David Kalis, David Kalis, Ward 8, is a member of the committee. We're also joined by members of the Planning and Development Board, and I can't see who is.
I think it's just Peter Dorninger.
Just Peter? Okay. Okay. And also Andrew Lee, our city solicitor, and several members of the public, also named Councilor Pam Wright and Councilor John Krinsman, both members of the committee. So thank you all for being here. We have a fairly full agenda, so I'd like to move to the appointees first. And we have two appointees who are here, who I'd like to ask to come to the table, and we may be able to deal with you together. Mr. LeBlanc and Ms. Greenberg. Do you mind coming up?
Can we sit here?
That's fine, that would be great.
Sorry.
The reason I've asked these gracious folks to come sit together is that this is, to the best of my knowledge, the first time two members of the same household have been nominated to serve on commissions, not the same commission, however. So I think I wanted to just acknowledge we have a tradition of public service in the city, but it generally doesn't extend everyone in the family at the same time. So congratulations and condolences. I don't know which is appropriate. But anyway, we have your background information as an attachment to the agenda, and members of the committee have a chance to review that in advance. But the purpose of this is to have you have an opportunity to say a little about yourselves and the background, what leads you to seek these roles. And also for members of the committee and others who are members of the council to ask questions if they have any of you. At the conclusion of that, I would entertain motions to submit your appointments to the full council, and then that's when it becomes official. But this is the preliminary step we have to take. So, Mr. LeBlanc, you just happen to be on a lower number on the docket, so we'll start with you. It's not a matter of any other preference, just that's the way it happens to hit. And you're being appointed to the Newtonville Historic District Commission, and you live at 33 Woodland Road in Auburndale. So you want to say a little about how you became interested in this role and
Yes, so, as I have a long history of 11 historical houses. I restored at least 4 of them in my life. I've been restoring houses since '92. I try to make them all historically significant. So that's my passion. I've been here in Newton for about 22 years. Restored 3 houses in Newton. And, I'm passionate about about the historical nature of Newton. You know, there's this wonderful fabric of all these 13 villages that came together. And, anyone that visits me from outside of New England, the first thing that they say is, wow, the beautiful old houses in this town. Second thing that they say is, the trees are so big. So, that's part of the reason why I'd like to join. I also sat on the Newtonville Area Council for a couple of years. I used to live in Newtonville. I lived on 185.
Mount Vernon.
175 Mount Vernon Street. And honest, I did know my own address.
in today's environment, a small address lapse of memory is insignificant, right?
So, and so I'm open for questions if anyone.
Okay. And perhaps maybe I could ask Ms. Greenberg to say a little of her background and then we can ask questions of you both. How's that?
So I've been a Newton resident for 25 years and I'm on our 3rd house. We're restoring it. We have a passion about old houses. We like to maintain the integrity. We think that it's important for the following generations and to still have these old homes and treasure them. They've been around for a long time. They don't fall down easily. So by maintaining them, we're stewards and we can pass this on to other generations. I want to give back to the city of Newton, and because I have a passion for old houses, I think this is a good match for me. You know, I want to make sure that the decisions being made fit within the fabric of the community. I believe that you can have an up-to-date house with all the modern conveniences, but still keep the architectural integrity of it for future generations.
Okay, thank you. So members of the committee, councilors present, questions for, yes, Councilor Gibb.
I know of you through the Newtonville Area Council.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I am just so thankful that you have chosen to volunteer and to, be on the historic commissions. You sound like wonderful matches for the commissions, and I wholeheartedly support your,
We did
Thank
get ticked off by the Newtonville Area Council because it was, the bylaw said that you have to be a resident.
Yeah. With
Yeah,
with no fault of our own,
Yeah.
quite a different house.
Yeah,
So,
but I know of you from that area.
Yes, yes. And we volunteer at the Newtonville Village Day every year and help run that. That's wonderful.
You have to travel a bit though, to go from Auburndale to Chestnut Hill. Newtonville is
Yeah.
not so far, but,
Yeah.
but it could be done.
Yeah.
Other questions? Got anyone raised their hand? Yes, Councilor Albright and then Councilor Kreisman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as a member of the Ward Two delegation, I'm happy that you, both of you are willing to serve on the Newtonville Area Council. I'm curious because a conversation came up recently in the Historic Commission about consideration of whether historic preservation was going to be 1, 2, or 3 units. And some of the members of the commission were concerned about, well, what if it's 3 units? I'm not sure I like 3 units. What do you both think about, as long as the outside is doing the historic preservation the way the commission would like to see it? Do you have an opinion as to whether the number of units matters?
I think that the number of units is determined by the zoning for that particular parcel of land. And if it is legally allowed to be 3 units, then it can be 3 units.
Yeah, I think the only question that I'd have is if the third one was up high and they required a fire escape and that was on the outside of the building. I would question on what side that fire escape would be on and if it was visible from the street. We don't expect people to be as fanatical as we are, so, but, I think
Thank
that's,
you for that.
Is that the Historical Commission or the Historic District Commission you're talking about?
It was the Historic District Commission. It was actually the Newtonville Commission. It was, and it was only one member that was bringing it up. So I was just curious what you both would have to say about that. And I appreciate that your willingness to serve. Thank you for that.
We've also been joined by Councilor Maliki from Ward 3. Councilor Chrisman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounded like there was a little discussion. I apologize, I didn't pick up on it, but these are 2 wonderful, obviously, residents of Auburndale. And I'm wondering why we're not either waiting for an Auburndale opening, why we're looking in Newtonville in the Chestnut Hill Historic District Commission.
I'm not sure that you all can answer that. I can.
From my
Councilor Baker?
understanding,
Yes,
there was a
Councilor.
need. From my understanding, there was a need in those areas. And they also wanted to diversify who represented these historical commissions, so it's just not from the area that you live in.
Couldn't have answered it better myself. Exactly. We have a need in a lot of our districts for additional members, and they fit the bill for both of these commissions.
I did talk to Ms. Kurz and I asked the question about residential preference, because I think it's important that residents be represented on the commission. We're delighted to have you serve, but I just have to say institutionally, I would not be, as a general matter, looking outside of commissions first. You all bring wonderful qualifications and interests. And if Auburndale is willing to be the source of the opportunity for us, then sorry, Councilor Chrisman, we'll borrow them and bring them east and.
yeah, at some point, it might be nice to roost back at home and be Auburndale.
Yeah.
But being part of Newtonville for as long as I have been, that is also a second home,
Yeah.
home of mine, so.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is that because Newtonville and Chestnut Hill are really lesser villages, they're going to pilfer the resources of Ward 4.
I think that's what you're hearing, but not realizing.
Did I not hear it correctly? I apologize. It's hard online. Yeah. Well, at the appropriate time, I'm happy to move approval.
Thank you very much. Councilor Kalis, I believe, has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you both for your willingness to serve. One thing I wanted to ask is how each of you balance the need for historic preservation with the push that could be modernization or change that might not fit exactly within historic preservation. How do you look at that?
Well, I think it's important to make sure a house is modernized and fits the living standards that we expect today. But I think that you can also maintain the structural integrity of a historic home on the outside so that it fits within the fabric of the neighborhood, of an old neighborhood.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking of recently is if someone requested a wheelchair ramp and it was gonna be on front of the building, how would I deal with that? And that's a tough one, is it's like, if there's a way to get the ramp, so it's not front and center, I think that would be the appropriate thing. But if there isn't a way, you don't want to evict the person from their house just because they can't enter their house. So,
That's a very good example. I appreciate it. Thank you.
It could be worked in.
Okay, any other counselors, with questions or, Counselor Fair?
Thank you. I'd just like to thank you both also for serving, and I'm very appreciative of your enthusiasm for preservation of some of our older homes. You may have heard we had a problem with one of the old homes in Ward 8, 29 Greenwood Street, which unfortunately has been severely damaged. And we're still trying to come to some resolution about that. But I think it's fabulous that there are people such as yourselves that are willing to serve and have a real passion for preservation. Thank you.
And I think we've been joined by Counselor Lucas, from Ward 2. Counselor Lucas?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I used to serve on the Newtonville Historic District Commission. So I just want to say, I do believe Mr. LeBlanc would be a good fit for the commission, as well as Ms. Greenberg would. I met them when they served on the Newtonville Area Council, and I wholly endorse their candidacy to fill these 2 open slots. Thank you.
thank you, Lucas.
Okay. Counselor Krinsman, I think it's your turn again.
I would like to move approval of both items.
Okay, this is Counselor Krinsman because he's from Auburndale. He's making a sacrifice to send you to the wilds of Chestnut Hill and Newtonville. All right, we'll entertain that. Thank you for that motion. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We appreciate both of you coming, and we look forward to your service.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is item 266-24, appointment of David Boronke, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing that, to the New Bedford Falls Historic District Commission. And again, we are rating Auburndale because Mr. Boronke lives at 187 Melrose Street in Auburndale, but he is on vacation, and I think he is here online. Is that correct?
I'm here, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Can we put him up on the screen so that we've got just his image? Wonderful. Thank you. Now, again, we have your background in the packet, but would you like to say a little bit about you're in an unusual situation because you are now serving in Auburndale, as I understand it, and now moving out of Auburndale. So we're not only rating the residents, Councilor Princeton, we're rating the district commission.
Recording in progress.
So,
Muting myself. I like.
Well, the switch is because I'm now doing 3 projects in the Auburndale Historic Commission. I'm the principal of Slocum Hall Design Group, an architecture firm based in Watertown, doing a lot of work in Newton. And because there is a direct conflict by now having 3 projects in the Auburndale Historic District, I'm now going to Upper Falls where I have no projects. So it works out well because there was a need on Upper Falls and I'm happy to serve.
questions for the,
So,
yes,
Yeah.
yes, Councilor.
I would reverse the question, just in terms of having your eye as a developer and the juxtapositioning of preservation with modern, standards. How do you feel about that?
I've built my business on, historically accurately updating beautiful old homes while modernizing them for easy living. I've done several projects in Newton. Several of them have won preservation awards within Newton. I am a preservationist. I truly believe that old homes should maintain their architectural merit, but that doesn't preclude them from being updated and brought to modern standards on the inside. That also means for, bringing these old homes to the current energy codes and figuring out ways to make that work in a way where you're not impacting the architectural details negatively. So that's what we do as in our firm, and it's truly what I believe. So So yeah, I think it's very possible to modernize old homes and make them function for modern living.
Let's see.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
you're right.
I thank you for serving, and that Upper Falls is probably one of the most treasured in my perspective, in terms of the resources, the historic resources in Upper Falls. So you will be valued on that district commission.
Councilor Albright, I think your hand's up. No. Councilor Christmas.
Thank you. I am unfortunately happy to move approval and lose this individual from Auburndale, at least through 2027, as I understand it. But then hopefully, you know, there will be some opportunities for you to do some work in Upper Falls and you can come on back. So I'm happy to move approval.
I'm not moving. I'm still one of yours.
I mean serving.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for the motion. Any further comments from anyone? If not, all those in favor will say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstention? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We're very grateful for your service, and again, your appointment will go before the council in this next meeting.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, item 285-24. This is the appointment of Ed Oliva, I hope I'm pronouncing it, Olteva, excuse me, to the Community Preservation Committee. This is an appointment to expire August 12th, 2027. And I believe he is here online. Is he here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here on Zoom.
Wonderful. So again, it would be helpful if you say a little of your background and what leads you to serve, and an interest in this particular role.
Sure. No, thanks. I appreciate the consideration. So I've been a Newton resident since 2008, so quite some time now, and I've been someone who's used the recreational facilities with both myself and my children as they've gone through the cycle of playing all the different sports and etc. And recently, in the last 10 years, I've played a large and larger role in Bike Newton, and this has really given me a chance to bike around the city with our residents and really look at all the different components that we have that we can take advantage of as residents. And I began to think about how these things got into place, and I began to realize that the Community Preservation Committee and the budget it has is a really powerful tool we have to really make some great and substantial improvements in the city. And such as recently, we're going all the stuff happening at Albemarle with the Gath pool and the playing fields. That's all financed by the fund, as well as even the kind of the smaller projects like the Spears Community Garden, which was just approved by the council. And so when the more I learned about this, I thought I could hopefully be helpful to the committee with my insight and the perspective I bring with recreation, with my work as a resident and my work on Bike Newton. So I'm happy to be considered, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions from members of the committee or council?
Susan.
I think Councilor Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a question for you. I'm just thanking you for your willingness to serve. Oh, I hope you're not hearing the dog barking in the background. Not just on the Community Preservation Committee, but all the work that you're doing with Bike Newton. And I think that these are interesting times for the Community Preservation Commission, because there's so much competition for the money between recreation, historic, housing. We need good people to help us think through these issues. So I thank you very much, and I would like to move approval.
Thank you. I would just note for the record, this is a candidate who does not come from Auburndale. So no disqualification.
He's one of mine.
I understand. Councilor Oliver. Councilor Oliver, you're muted, I think. Can you unmute? Is he muted? Are we muted him, or is it?
Councilor Oliver, if you just sign it, I'll translate for you. Go ahead. Oh, okay.
Great, thanks. Although my ASL is a little rusty these days. First, I want to say thank you for your continued willingness to serve. And I just want to make sure that I did hear correctly. Are you going to be serving on both committees now simultaneously? You'll be working, you'll be doing work,
Continue with,
right?
yeah,
Bike
so
and the Preservation Committee?
my understanding is I'm allowed to serve in both capacities, yes.
Absolutely. I'm just kind of curious, like, as many of the city councilors here on this phone call, congratulations for detesting your own free time. We really appreciate everything you're doing for the city. And thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure I understood if you're going to be, handling both roles. Thank you so much.
Thanks for allowing me to clarify.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, we have motion. Any further comments from any member of the committee or otherwise? If not, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstention? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Again, your appointment was before the council in session.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And you all are welcome to stay, but you also, I just want to say, gracious to come, and you're welcome to sit in on the conversation, but the formal part of the agenda that requires your presence is over, and sometimes people take advantage of the fact that they might like to eat dinner, so I didn't.
Hang around to see if they're gonna talk about us.
I just didn't want you to feel obligated to be here. You'll have those obligations soon enough.
Thank you.
All right, okay, now, this is, next item is 7624(3), which is, the discussion and possible amendments to how building height is measured. This is zoning and planning committee requesting discussion and possible amendments to chapter 30 zoning to require that building height is measured in original grade instead of finished grade. And you all who are, on this call may recall, this is an item that, we had worked on, and there were additional questions that several members of the committee had. So we held on to it so that we could bring it through the process a little further and hopefully get those questions answered to the satisfaction of colleagues and get it out to the council. This is a recommendation from the department of a relatively simple change, but with important potential beneficial impacts as they view it. And I'll leave it to them to make the presentation. Who's going to do this? Okay, Mr. Lamel will be the lead, and we're welcome again. Everybody. You got right and found it. All right.
So, thank you, Chair. And again, the continued conversation here following the public hearing that was a little over a month ago now, I believe, or about a month ago. And we're going to split this, or we'd like to split this up into two parts. Go to the next slide. And this was shared in the packet as well. But first, and just what we've done to date, the proposed amendment itself, and focusing on some of the questions that were raised previously, and then the request that came for some additional analysis. Hopefully then bringing it into discussion and possible vote if that's your prerogative, and then talk about some parallel amendments that we think are appropriate to be considered and address some of the concerns and questions that were brought up from counselors, from building professionals, and from citizens who spoke at the public hearing. For the next slide. So what we're sharing here is no different than what was shared at the public hearing. It's still, the recommendation is that if a project or a parcel is developing or redeveloping, and it is raising the grade, then the measurement of height from a zoning perspective of that building is taken from the original grade, the existing grade, before that work is done. There was a question about the proposed language about that says original or proposed, whichever is lower. And so in the case of when you are lowering the grade, and we'll look at an example of that, it's no different than how it functions today. What was asked of us to look at some of those additional properties. We were asked to look at some earthworks ordinances and talk through them as a possible parallel amendment. So we'll get those in part 2, as well as some of the interplay with some of the other changes that were made. The recent change to retaining walls will come up in some of the examples, and we'll talk more about it in parallel amendments. Next slide. So this is the language. I'm not going to go into it again because you've seen it before, but just clarifying again that the proposal is that the effective date be set for January 1, 2025. This is really to consider a few things. One, that pre-development of these projects takes a very long time. There's a lot of work and effort that goes into these projects well before they get seen by anyone within the city, as well as time for the city, the engineering department, the inspectional services department to adjust as well. Next slide. Again, just highlighting that change. There were some questions around the language of where we measure height from the original grade or proposed, whichever is lower. So again, the change that's before you is only going to affect properties that are raising the grade. If they are not raising the grade, it is no different than how things are done today. We corrected the formula. Councilor Getz showed that we just transcribed that incorrectly. So that has been corrected. And then again, just, original or proposed, whichever is lower, making sure that that's consistent throughout the ordinance language. Next slide. Next slide. Let's look at that. So now we'll get into some of the analysis that was asked of us. So what we did is we looked at 3 different types of sites that could be impacted. So there's sites that would slope up from the street. So the lower elevation is at the curb and then it goes up towards the back, a flat site, and then looking at some sites where it slopes down, the higher elevation is at the curb, and as you get to the back, it slopes away from the property. Go to the next slide. So this project completed Newton Center. This is a row of properties where the site slopes up as you go back. They're built into the hillside. This is an example of where the existing home was torn down. The new home lowered the grade, so they removed earth, lowered down. What you can see between the before and after with the pinkish color is that the eave, the roof eave of the new home is lower, significantly lower than what was there before. But actually, the ridge height of the new home is taller than what was there before. And so that's just to say is that what we are really concerned about is when people are raising the grade. This home feels lower and it feels smaller. It feels a little less imposing. We can debate that, of course. And then the second thing, if you go to the next slide. So this home under the proposal would be measured exactly the same. It's 2.5 stories from a zoning perspective. Now it'd be 2.5 stories under the proposal. The basement would still be considered a full basement. The one thing is that there are some retaining walls over 4 feet here. And so with that, if this were to be proposed today, with the recent change that happened in April, any retaining wall over 4 feet, this would have to be redesigned for it to be a fully by right project. Not saying that it can't happen, but basically the math and everything should be roughly the same under this new proposal.
You could still get a special permit for this.
And they could, if they did want to do those larger retaining walls, they could still get a special permit. That's correct. Next slide. Just some key metrics here. Particular, I'm just saying how they lowered the height. So the before height of the basement floor was at an elevation of 215. The after was at 209, and the first floor was originally at 224, almost 225, and down to 219. So again, they really lowered this home. And even though it's a bigger home, it might not necessarily feel much bigger or much more imposing. Next slide. This is a home that's under construction right now in Oak Hill Park, 184 Spears. It's a single story slab on grade that was there. It's being demolished and a 2.5 story home is being put up. I think if you go to the next slide, you'll see what's happening here is this is a flat site. They're raising the grade with a retaining wall of about 1.5 foot, depending on where you are. So not a major intervention that's happening here, but all around this small site is this 1.5 foot retaining wall. And what you can see here is what that does, what that means for what's considered a basement, how many stories and how tall the building is, and how much square footage is counting towards floor area ratio or FAR. So under what we do is, I know the words here say proposed grade is the current rules. So from an FAR standpoint, the proposed grade, which is what it is in place, that home has 2,900 square feet of FAR. If we were to then measure from original grade using this new proposal, the FAR becomes 3,700 square feet. That's because this basement under the current rules is considered a basement. Under the proposal before you today, this basement would be considered a story. And so it goes from a 2.5-story building to a 3.5-story building. And you can see the basement the reason why a basement would be considered a basement is because more than 4 feet of the walls would be exposed. If you go back one, Jacqueline, you can just see how the original home, the front door is at level with the sidewalk. The new home, you go up a bunch of stairs. So there's a lot of basement exposed. And then if you were to add 1.5 feet of exposure to that basement, it'd be fairly significant. And this home is doing that, one, so that they can get a full basement plus a 2.5-story building. And because I think a lot of you may know that Oak Hill Park has a very high water table, and there's a stormwater ordinance, the basement has to be above a certain distance from the high water table. So if you go to the next slide and go to the slide after that, these are some of the numbers. What would happen if the current rules were in place is that this home could have a basement, just like it could raise the grade, it could still do that. But instead of a 2.5-story building above that grade, it would only be allowed to have a 1.5-story building above that. So it's just choosing where you put your 2.5 stories. The zoning allows for 2.5 stories. The other option is to do a 2.5-story building like they're doing above grade and have no basement, or have a crawl space basement that isn't a full height, habitable space basement. Or, as always, you can come for a special permit and ask for 3 stories. So there's a lot of options, but I think the by right outcome is a better outcome under this proposal. Next slide. This is a site that slopes away and down from the street. You can see here the home that existed before, and the home that, as it appears from the street, that replaced it. If you go to the next slide, I think what's important here is to see, because it slopes away from the street, this is what you're seeing from the back. Essentially, what is a 2.5-story building from the front, it is really a very tall 3.5-story building from the back, where they filled in a ton of earth, built a lot of retaining walls. And again, just like you saw with the Spears example, this is happening so that the basement is a basement, and that square footage isn't counted from a zoning perspective towards your FAR. And so the original, how we, those numbers should be flipped, I'm sorry. But essentially how this appears on paper right now is that there's about 5,200 square feet of space, when really there's 7,500 square feet of livable space in this building, and really even more if you count the half-story at the top. And again, a 2.5-story building is really a 3.5-story building. And the FAR allows on this parcel about 5,300 square feet. So you can just see where developers are working right up against what they're allowed to do, and then the amount of space that they can essentially discount. However they can do that, that's what they're looking to do here.
So I'm going to make one suggestion. When the slides are put together for the report,
sure,
you might just make the corrections to indicate with one is with the proposed change, one is without the proposed change.
I can do that.
Okay.
Yep, no, not a problem. And then you can see here again how this would work in tandem with the recent retaining wall change. There are a variety of retaining walls on this site that are over 4 feet. So in addition to them changing, that would trigger a special permit as well. And I just would say, if you can go to the next slide, I think, again, Newton is diverse in size of lots and type of lots and the types of homes that are on them. But I think this change is meant to say you need to be working with the grade. It's not that you can't raise the grade. It's not that you can't have retaining walls. It's just in some instances, you might have to do that and then do a 1.5-story building instead of a 2.5-story building with the basement. And these are all choices that we can be made. And again, I think these are things that we think are for the better. And I'll leave it at that. And then we can talk about maybe some of the parallel amendments that we think can even take it to the next step and address some of the other things that were brought up.
Okay, thank you. Members of the committee, councilors, questions? Councilor Getz.
Yeah, so I actually appreciate the work that went into these examples. because it's exactly what I wanted to understand and see, just in terms of the two sides of this. I'm seeing with the 184 Spires, that in fact, neither this one or the other one would have been allowed to go forward as a by right project because of the FAR calculations,
FAR, I'm sorry.
Yes, the FAR.
And the number of stories
Right.
and the height.
Right. So I think of it as being, important to sort of think about that, just in terms of just the amount of shift that's happening on these individual lots. I also, appreciate that, if someone wants to move forward, they can, solicit a special permit. So that's always an option, in terms of these changes. But I think it's really important for us to be contextual and think in a bigger picture, just in terms of the implementation of the stormwater ordinance. And then also too, just the whole sort of like, the more I learn, how much of Newton is affected by, our watershed of the Charles River. So I really do believe that it's really important for us to make these many steps and to, think about the bigger picture. So thank you for doing this because it sort of got to the nitty gritty. And then, especially in Ward 8, this is going to have an effect and it's choices.
Okay, thank you. And Councilor Albright.
Did you call me Counselor Baker?
Can we put her up on the full screen?
Yes, he did.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Kalis. So, my concern continues to be that, and I remember that I wasn't on the zoning and planning committee back in the day, but there was a time when the zoning and planning committee for many, many years made very small incremental steps that added up to a confusing zoning code that we're living with today. And I'm afraid that we are doing the same kind of thing with this particular change. There's an interplay between FAR and retaining walls and grade. And I'm not sure that we're doing this in a very comprehensive way, as Councilor Getz was just saying. And, I'm not sure that we're really looking at the big picture here and seeing how the interplay really works together. For example, the picture that Mr. Lamel showed of the sloping down the hill project, and it was a large project, but I'm not sure why it matters unless it was causing a stormwater runoff problem, which I don't think it was. Maybe Mr. Lamel, maybe you can help me with that. But the issue of grade has to do with how it looks and how it interferes with the neighborhood, and does it interfere with stormwater and runoff for the neighbors? And that particular project, I'm not sure what problem it caused for anybody. The fact that it was big is a whole other issue. That we allowed that FAR to happen is another issue. And frankly, the way we consider basements as counting or not with respect to FAR doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And it's another issue that needs to be taken into account. So, I also still don't understand what the impact of this grade change thing will be on multifamily housing. And, I think I read the memo from the building pros, and I was particularly interested in what they had to say about that Chase Braceland project and how this wouldn't have impacted that one at all. And there are other solutions that would impact it if we took it as a more comprehensive view. So I may be a minority of one on this committee with respect to my position, but I think that moving forward on this without a comprehensive look at all of the things that impact the size and shape and grade of a house, it would be a mistake.
Okay, thank you. I want to recognize colleagues and I don't know, want to hear the questions first and then come back, or how do you want to respond?
To you.
Well, I think that let's just sort of respond to Councilor Albright, and just say from my point of view, doing something about a problem now does not exclude doing other things later, but Mr. DeBell can comment.
Well, for the example on Beethoven Street, I think the zoning ordinance allows for 2.5-story buildings and a 36-foot height. And that is kind of viewed from all around the property. So in that instance, it's viewed as a 2.5-story building from the front, but a 3.5-story building from the back. And I think there's situations where the adjacent, the property abutting that in the rear is at even lower elevation. And so it's looking up at that taller building. So the height, they're using the manipulation of grade to go beyond the 2.5-story and 36-foot maximum height that is allowed in the zoning. And so I think that's what the zoning allows, and that's what should be enforced. And they're using how we measure height and how we deal with grade to manipulate that. And it's the same thing with FAR. So the FAR of that site is about 5,300 square feet, and they basically built on paper 5,300 square feet of FAR. But in reality, that home is over 7,000 square feet of habitable area. And we can talk about when a basement should or shouldn't count a lot. But again, the zoning has an FAR, and that's what the city has decided is an appropriate amount of square footage. And we're saying right here, just how people are manipulating so that on paper it's within that, but in reality, it is very much not within that. And we think this can very much address that.
I think we should figure out why it matters and then deal with that. I mean, the fact that it's larger, they've found a way to manipulate our zoning code so that they have a bigger house because they're counting, they are or are not counting the basement. We should figure out why that really matters to us. Does it matter because it's a very big house and we don't like very big houses? Or does it matter because, because it looks bad for the neighborhood and it's having a problem with stormwater, which are the things that matter to me and I think matter to all of us. The other one that you showed about Oak Hill, I mean, you're never going to get a 1-story house built again in like the original ones from Oak Hill. And they're all going away and they're all coming up taller. And so what if they have a foundation that includes a basement? Because unless there's a water table problem, in which case we should deal with it as a separate issue. But that Oak Hill house that you just showed that has I forget, was it a 3-foot basement? I forget what the amount was, but it looks like a standard house that's all over the neighborhoods of Newton with a foundation that has a basement that's below it, and then it's a 2.5-story house. So I don't know what problem we're solving with this. I'm just not sure that we're on the right track.
Harry, you want to respond?
Yeah, if I can just briefly, I think the problem, at least as we've understood it over the years, has been about the context. That there's an expectation because the zoning allows 2.5 stories. The zoning allows a certain amount of floor area based on the size of the lot. And that's the expectation, is that's what will get built. I see this as just resetting to that. You may still decide that there need to be further changes. Maybe that FAR is still too big. But right now we're getting something that exceeds what those expectations, because they're taking the house that the zoning says is allowed and then putting it on top of a hill, essentially, so that it's much taller than other homes. Whereas neighbors expect to see no more than 2.5 stories and 36 feet, it's going higher than that because you're building up the site first with these walls and then putting that house. I don't think there's a problem with having basements that don't count towards FAR if the basement really is mostly underground. It's when you start building up the site and you're exposing more of the basement and the house is getting taller in order to get these 9-foot ceilings in the basement, and then the houses feel out of scale with the neighborhood. So that's the problem we're trying to solve here. I mean, the stormwater it does impact, make changes to stormwater. Our stormwater ordinance, I think with the update is pretty comprehensive. So you will have to account for that with stormwater systems. But it's really about that what the zoning says is allowed is not what actually appears at the end of the day. And just sort of resetting that to get rid of that, not loophole, but, way to get around those heights.
So I'll make one request and then I'll be quiet and let others talk, and that would be for the report, since context is important and that's important to me as well. I would love for you to show it for the when you include this PowerPoint for the full council, show the context. This particular house that you showed in Oak Hill, is it out of context with all the other houses that are like it? Is it much higher, for example? And the house that was on the slope down the hill, is that much higher from the street than other houses? Was it out of context with the neighborhood? I think that would help me, and it probably would help others.
Let's see what we can do to accommodate you. Let me just say that I share the view of the planning department. What we have are some generalized controls, and those can be varied by variance or by special permit in appropriate cases. But what we're trying to do is to get everybody to play in a sense the same rule book in terms of how you count the numbers of square feet and how tall the building is. And the different variable here is that you're modifying the grade from what's there before. If you left the grade alone, you wouldn't have any of these problems. So I think that's really what we're trying to get at. But let me recognize, I think in order, is this showing up in the order people put their hands up? Okay. I believe it's Councilor Kalis next, and then I'll go to Councilor Wright, I believe. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I agree with you in one respect, Councilor Albright. I'd rather have comprehensive reform or ordinances. But in this case, we've been dealing with this for far too long in Ward 8, not just in Oak Hill Park, but other areas where there are flood zones. And the runoff is exactly the problem. What's happening is that these houses are being built. They're being built initially out of scale. Now they're in scale because there's so many of them, and that's part of the problem. But initially they were out of scale, and all of the downhill houses were getting flooded. No matter that we have an engineering department that signed off on it and all the water is supposed to be maintained within that property, it's not. And, we've done site visits, meetings with the engineers and the developers, and time again, you go there, you see a flat area and you see this raised house, and the developer saying they approved it, and engineering saying, well, all the water is supposed to stay there, but it doesn't. And it floods the house next door. It creates lakes between houses, and it's terrible. And we've got to do something about it, because we have a situation that's just out of control in terms of what developers are building. And despite what we have and our best efforts to have our engineering department, I think, control this, it's not working. And we need something. If this is just, right now going to stop the bleed, then great. We can come back to something that is more comprehensive. But it is bad out there when it comes to this flooding and the impacts that these houses are having. So I just want you to know that. You might not have, constituents in Ward 2 that have been calling you about this, but this is a constant thing in Ward 8. And I would, if I could vote for this twice, I would.
Thank you very much. Councilor Wright?
Thank you.
Larry, I'm just sorry, excuse me. What were you?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, where I am, power's out and my internet's going back and forth. I agree with Councilor Kalis and also with Councilor Getz. I see this as a loophole, that one example, the FAR is 5,300 and the developer built right up to it, and then when I was doing analysis of a bunch of houses, many of them, not everyone, but many of them are within 10 feet of FAR. But in reality, it's, 7,500. So, and look at Clinton, building it up and things like that and context and of the neighborhood and maybe, yes, it would be helpful to see, the houses on either side of these builds and that to give you a better perspective of it. But I think it's something we need to be done now. Yes, I'd like an overall, some changes, but there's a few changes we can do quicker and sooner and affect the houses that are coming or will be coming in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'm going to assume you can hear me okay unless somebody tells me otherwise, but I think that one of the things that I just heard from Councilor Albright that I really think is the crux of the challenge here, and that is why does this matter? And I think we just heard the answer, from Councilors Kalis, Getz, and Councilor Wright. From my perspective, I look at projects not just the several that were highlighted by the planning department, but one of these projects that may live in infamy for a while, at least in Ward 1, is 20 Clinton Street. If anyone hasn't had a chance to take this in, you should go have a look. You should go have a look. Because on paper, that project, it was reasonable. But if you look at it in reality, it's anything but reasonable. It is massive. It is overbuilt. It is too tall. It's not the kind of project we want to be regularly approving. And I do think that, at least from my perspective, like one of the other questions I heard, Councilor Albright talking about was, do we have a problem with large houses? No, I don't think that that's really what we're trying to accomplish here, and is to scale back on the large houses. But I think what's important for us to understand is we're not just green lighting large houses. What we're doing is we're green lighting very large houses being built that are really out of context with the neighborhood. And very specifically, the dimensional controls of FAR, total height, and lot coverage and or setbacks, in my opinion, and I think we've all seen this in various combinations throughout the city. On paper, it's one thing, right? If you're looking at site plans, it's like, oh yeah, okay, that fits. And okay, the FAR is a little bit big, and okay, they're pushing into the setbacks a couple of feet here and there. But once you start to put it all together, OMG, right? It's like some of these places are just, you walk down the street and it's like, bam, look at this guy here. That sticks out. Like that property is, just something, what is it? What are the words I'm trying to think of? Something's not like the others here. So I think that from my perspective is what we're trying to get control of. And I do think that there are a few things that I would like to point to that from my perspective, and I will acknowledge, because there are a lot of people in the audience who are going to point this out if I don't, so I'll do it first. I haven't been on ZAP for very long. I get that, but I've been in Newton for 20 plus years. I've been paying a lot of attention to ZAP and zoning for a while here. I think we need to pay attention to stormwater management, right? And the overall impact that we're creating on abutting properties, right? Ward 8 is a great example. What we're starting to see in Ward 1 are great examples as well, 20 Clinton Street. I think it's also important for us as a group to start to pay really close attention to the differences that either, we're addressing within special permits, all of our permits, and how we differentiate between where we're willing to make exceptions, whether that's single-family residences, or multifamily residences, because I think that multifamily residence, everything that I hear in terms of our own values, maybe we need to make more exceptions for multifamily residences than single-family residences, at least in our zoning. And then if there's an exceptionally large project or a project that needs to go for a special permit, Spires leaps to the forefront here just in recent conversation. Like, to me, I'm okay if that project has to go and obtain a special permit. That is a really big single-family home. I don't want to exclude it. That is not my point. But if that property owner needs to get a special permit because it exceeds some of our norms, I think that's perfectly acceptable, almost to be expected, frankly. And I know I'm going on, but just one more comment that I want to make. I think it's okay for us as a city council to start to consider the question. And I think I've heard a lot of people bring this up, but I haven't heard it tonight yet, so I'm going to put it out there. It's probably okay in some locations for us to not allow an increase in grade to accommodate a basement for a property that has an incredibly high water table. Just going to say it out loud. I think that's got to be okay for us to think about or to consider. But anyway, from that perspective, I think there's a lot of great work here. I think we need to start making some progress here. And I know we're going to get to this in a few minutes, but throughout the lengthier kind of timeline that planning is proposing, I do think we can shortstop a little bit of that work by making some progress really quickly here. I don't think we have to solve everything out of the gate. And I think I've heard a few of us say a few times, it's okay that, we don't let perfect be the enemy of great or good and great. So let's make some progress. I'm no longer making sense to myself. I see I'm cracking up some of the members in the audience. You get what I mean. I'm going to be quiet now.
Construe your comments as in support of the amendment. Is that about fair comment?
I don't think he heard you.
I don't think he did. All right, I want to go to counselors who haven't spoken yet, but I do want to recognize Counselor Leary. Thank you very much.
Actually, I was raising my hand.
I know, that's why I wanted to say, I was going to recognize you and say something.
Oh, thank you.
And then I'll go back to the
Thank you very much. I will be much briefer than my other colleague from Ward 1 because he already went over a lot of important topics and comments. But I do want to say that I wholeheartedly support this effort because I think 20 Clinton Street has become the poster child for what we don't want. And one thing we don't want on land use or any committee is surprises. And the issue that I think is really important to consider is the grade change that happens so many times. And actually in land use, I believe there's another project with significant grade change on River Street that I'm concerned about. So it's like the first question I ask now is there a grade change when we're in land use? But so I think whether that's an issue, that's part of this discussion on how we measure building heights, certainly should be. And I haven't been, I did miss the beginning, a few minutes at the beginning, so there might have been some discussion around that. And I just don't want any more surprises for projects that we approve in land use or even or by right projects either. I'm also concerned, the other issue that I'm seeing, particularly in Onandam, is widespread gentrification. It's really an issue now. I've been living on my street for over 20 years, and I think I have the 10th house that's being knocked down and will be redeveloped. This one that I'm looking at that's coming up before historic is all apartments right now, somewhat affordable apartments, and I'm sure that's going to change to $1.7 million condos, probably 3.
This is part of a larger item we're going to get to later as well, but But this is basically just saying the baseline of how you measure height for the building will be the current grade, whatever that is, rather than a grade that you create.
Perfect.
And that's basically all we're trying to do.
That sounds like a good way to do it. And I just want my other comment on what Councilor Aller was mentioning water tables. My understanding is the new stormwater ordinance does discuss that, the water table, and it has to be a certain distance. I think it's a foot, of being the highest water table in the basement. And I don't know whether that's enough, if that's the right number in terms of the measurement, if that's gonna help. But particularly in Oak Hill Park, where if everyone had, you know, there were no basements in when they first built those houses, and there probably was a reason for that. It might not have just been that they were cheaper to build, but now they're all building basements, significant basements. It's causing displacements. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair.
Delighted to have you. Always welcome. Let me recognize a couple of hands that have been up and then go back to Councilor Farrell. And I'll come back to you, Councilor Albright, after I've had a chance to, you haven't spoken. Councilor Lucas, and then Councilor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to planning for coming up with this draft ordinance. Good work. I do have a couple of questions on it. Mr. Ramel, in your presentation, you said that the new ordinance would go into effect on January 1st, 2025. And I was just wondering if you could, if you did give any consideration of an earlier adoption date.
This is really after speaking with various property owners, architects, developers, as well as engineering and inspectional services. There is a significant amount of time, energy, and money put into projects in advance of it ever making it to the permitting system here with the city. And I'm really talking about by right projects right now, in particular. And so we don't want to catch we want to make sure that we think this is the right change, but we don't want to catch every single property in limbo here that's in the middle of the design process. And this amount of time, I think, is appropriate. It might seem longer than you would like, but it is really necessary. And as it starts to get closer, we've already been speaking with inspectional services about that, is that they're going to be speaking with potential applicants and saying, listen, you know, it's October, it's November. You need approval before January 1, 2025. And if you can't get it, then, you know, as we proposed it, this isn't going to work. So that's going to be out there, and it's going to be front and center for all, you know, possible projects coming in. And I think we're going to see projects, you know, respond appropriately. So it might seem like a long time, but the development process is long.
Yeah, if anything, I would not go shorter. You're still going to catch people that are already in the design process, that have already spent money on architects and other professionals that are going to have to redesign as is. What we really don't want to do is to catch projects that have already started the permitting process. So you need to apply for your engineering site plan permit before you can even, you have to apply for that and have that approved before you can apply for your building permit. So this effective date is tied to the building permit. So we don't want people to go through the engineering review process and then have the zoning change on them. And after that time has already been spent. So I think January 1 is the soonest we should make this change. I would not recommend we set an earlier effective date.
Okay, all right, I guess we'll go with January 1. I have questions as this new ordinance relates to land use, and I see Councilor Kelly has her hand up, so I'm sure she's going to follow up some land use related questions after me. With respect to the building height, the maximum building height in an MR and an SR zone for a single or two family home is 36 feet, right?
Correct.
So we're assuming this new ordinance goes into effect January 1st, 2025. I just want to be clear. That 36 feet is going to be measured from the original lower grade, assuming that they artificially raised the grade, right? So just some basic math, if they want to do a 4-foot retaining wall and increase the grade by 4 feet, that means effectively the actual structure, the home, could only be 32 feet, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
I think Ms.
Okay.
Thomas, I don't know if you can see you can say yes.
Yes, I saw them nodding their heads and then they said yes. I just wanted to be clear. And sticking with the special permit, if they need zoning relief, the relief would be on the change of grade, not building height, correct?
The relief would be to go from 2.5 to 3 stories and or for additional FAR. We haven't proposed a special permit to measure height differently, to measure like from the proposed grade, but there's already existing relief paths built into the zoning ordinance that could be utilized. So the examples that Mr. Lamel showed, you were going from 2.5 to 3 or 3.5 stories. Your FAR was exceeding what's allowed due to counting the basement. You could come in and ask for 3 stories and ask for additional FAR. You can't ask to go over 36 feet though. So that they'll need to comply with that unless there is some unique hardship that warrants a variance.
I was just gonna say that would require a variance, so you just, okay. So it's gonna be 36 feet maximum, no exceptions with, the variance. And we're gonna count from the original grade, assuming they are raising the grade. And the special permit relief would essentially be for an FAR allowance to go over.
Or story,
Pardon?
extra, or 3 stories, as I hear.
Or 3 stories, okay. All right, I think I am all set. And thank you very much.
Thank you. The eminent chair of land use, Councilor Kelly.
Thank you so much. Tariq, the vice chair of land use, is right. A lot of what I'm hearing and what I'm thinking all relates to land use. And a lot of this started a number of years ago when we got rid of the ordinance that talked about any grade change greater than 3 feet would require a special permit. Especially when I think about 20 Clinton and Spires Road. Some of these are because we got rid of changing the grade as a criteria to consider in a special permit. Let me just start off though by saying when I first heard about this proposal, I was 100% in favor. I'm like, yes, perfect timing, do it. And I've had a few weeks to think more about it. And I've been listening to people tonight and hearing from others. And some of my hesitations are around the incremental piecemeal mini steps approach that others have used terminology like that. Yes, on the one hand, making some changes to try and immediately fix glaring problems, say we've heard from, the Oak Hill Park people. And by the way, it's not only an Oak Hill Park problem, as has been pointed out, we're using 20 Clinton Street in Nonantum as a very recent egregious example. I think as a planner, as a landscape architect, as a site planner and land use planner, that sometimes these incremental small changes end up not considering the whole well enough. And when you start to head down the path of micro changes, it's harder to get back on a path of looking at things holistically and comprehensively. And that's my hesitation on this one. I like the bigger picture approach. I worry about what we might be missing when we keep doing things with very specific micro focus, because as has been pointed out by numerous counselors tonight, I guess starting with Councilor Albright, who said basically everything I thought I wanted to say, FAR is involved in this. retaining walls is involved in this, grade change, height, and FAR, and basements. I have a few comments I would make to her, but I can do them not in this meeting about why basements FAR does matter and how viewing impact on a neighborhood, I don't think should only be considered from the front, especially on these steep slopes. It's in the rear when you're using the basement as a walkout and usable habitable space. It's those rear and backside rear neighbors who have to look at that visual impact. So I think FAR, drainage for sure, though I've been schooled now in my six and a half years on land use by the former chairs to not talk about grading and drainage. Many of us who have been on land use for a while have heard that. I don't agree with it. I think as counselors, it's one of the things we hear all the time from neighbors and abutters and constituents. Their fears around how will this affect my property? Will my basement flood? And as Councillor Kalis said, sometimes, engineering says this has been designed well, yet there is flooding and stormwater problems on abutting neighbor's property. So I wish that we would look at this in a bigger picture way and to include all of those things: flooding, FAR, retaining walls, grade change. I'm not sure that existing grade is automatically the right way to judge this. As Mr. Lamel said, like maybe the proposed is lower. They might be digging down. They might be starting lower, in which case, why would we start with existing? I'm just not sure this has been fully thought through. That's my issue. And I see Jen Kyra wanting to answer, which will be very helpful for all of us. I'm looking at the land use committee ramifications because this is where it all ends up when people come for a special permit. We see this, we've been thinking about these things for years, how all of these are intertwined. And that's why at first I was so excited about the idea of just changing how you measure building height, but I don't think it's that simple. So I'll just stop with that. And I thank everybody for their comments. Everybody who's spoken tonight on and off the committee was really helpful. And I look forward to hearing what Ms. Kyra has to say in response to some of my concerns. Thank you.
So I just wanted to clarify, I think you make a very good point about sometimes if the proposed is lower, that may be better. And that is how we're proposing to measure it. So it's existing grade or proposed, whichever is lower. So we did consider that, and for anything that's sort of digging out or lowering the grade, that's the grade we'll use. And that's actually not a change from how it's measured today. I agree with your points about the visual effects from the side and the rear when there's a walkout basement, and that's exactly what we're trying to address here. This is addressing, I think this is somewhat holistic in that it is addressing FAR, height, grading, not directly stormwater, but it's really about, as Mr. Lamel said earlier, working with the topography that exists. It's on all of these sites, or 99.9% of these sites, there was a home there already. So it's not a wild, undeveloped, steep lot that is only buildable if you do significant grading. There was a home there. You're looking, generally making these changes and major grade changes to get around our rules. So this one change, I think, does holistically address a number of those concerns because it brings us back to FAR really not counting when it's truly in the basement and truly underground, addressing the sort of walkout basements, the manipulating of the height, and just forcing builders to work with what's existing rather than trying to make flat lots or taller lots where they don't exist.
Thank you. I do want to go to people who haven't been heard first, if I can, and then come back to some people who have spoken. I believe Councillor Councilor Farrell is next, and then Councilor, I'm trying to read the screen. I think it's Councilor Block. Yeah, Councilor Farrell.
Thank you, Chair. I guess we'd like to start by just saying water. All of the other considerations around, I think we're beginning to understand the damage from water and the increasing damage that will come from more water as the climate changes. I believe size, context do matter, but it's water that's really a problem. I know 4 houses right now that were built. Now, I've had a very extensive career in the city council, but I know 4 houses in that time period of 6 months that the first thing they did was put in pumps when they started to dig, and that water was pumped out into the storm drains. And I've reported them, but it happens all the time, and it doesn't just happen in Oak Hill Park. There are 2 residences, one of which is within 5 feet of my own house, and 2 others in different places, not near Oak Hill Park, where this happens. The water table is just too high. And no matter whether we're digging up and down, I don't know whether we need to pay more attention to the engineering regulations about how far a basement floor needs to be from the water table. But this is a significant issue with 528 Boylston Street, is water. And what will happen when the building that large and covering in that big and that heavy compresses on the land where the water table is very high. And it's of concern to the neighbors. I just think water is a big one. I guess I'd like to know how many projects are in the pipeline right now versus the ones that you think might be coming along. Anything that you think might be coming along, it seems to me, we can give those people notice that this is an amendment is going to happen very soon. Maybe those, I guess I'd like to know how many are in the pipeline. If is it 5, is it 100, is it 250? If it's 5, then I think it's possible to say, maybe if you're that far along in the pipeline, okay, but we're gonna make you really pay attention to the engineering and stuff. The other ones, I don't know. I think it's possible to say, you know, everybody, I can't believe there's a contractor around right now who doesn't know that we're talking about this and that this is going to become an issue. So whether it's 5 months from now or 3 weeks from now, which is too short, I admit, but whether there's something in between that is more reasonable, I would very much like the planning department to think about that. You know, the largest example of this to me is the new 8-lane highway from Brighton into Boston. And people say, we've already spent so much money on it. But the conditions have changed since that planning started to the point where maybe it's worth saying those first $100 million in development have to be scrapped, or some portion of them have to be scrapped, or we do something different. I just think we can look at this very seriously because of water and its increasing importance to all of the development, not just in Ward 8, but certainly in Ward 8. A lot of the areas where there are watershed issues. I mean, look at Cheeseburg and that whole area. It's the water table's terrible. Anyway, thank you, Chair. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you. I appreciate those comments. I want to recognize councilors who, again, have not spoken, but move this process along, because remember, we've got a conversation about complementary matters, we've got the tear downs, and we have, we want to get back to Berto. So we've got a full agenda tonight. I just ask councilors to keep that in mind when you make comments, and then we can move forward. Councilor Block, I don't think you've been speaking yet.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question about this definition of existing grade. Is there a problem in determining what the existing grade is if a house has been raised in the past and is now being redeveloped? Is that a problem, or is that just, or should we not worry about something like that?
So there's 3 different categorizations about a lot and how we determine existing grade. And so if there's an existing building there, you basically look back 5 years. And so if there were changes made, further than 5 years back, that's the existing grade. If there was a change made 2 years prior to that, then yeah, you go back and see what was the grade prior to that change 2 years ago. And I think we want to make sure that people aren't, sneaking in and raising the grade, or demolishing house, raising the grade, and then coming in. There's always enforcement, but I think we've done a fairly good job here of that 5-year look back period. Then there's obviously, if there isn't a building on the site, if it's just vacant, which there's not a ton of those in the city, and then if there's a subdivision which has a very specific definition in the process, then it goes through that process. I don't know if Attorney Lee is on the call and wants to make any other comments. Otherwise, I think we've tried to capture that as best we could within the definition.
I wasn't thinking that somebody would be trying to manipulate this. I was just thinking that a grade might have been raised, and I guess you're telling me if it was within the last 5 years, you recognize that you need to go back to the preceding grade level. Again, just assuming good intent on everybody's part, how do you get to 5 years? I'm just curious.
Is that, let me just comment that this ordinance we've talked about is in effect in other jurisdictions. It's not that this is unique to Newton. The planning department's, the 5-year look back, I think, is just the planning department can respond, is just to try and make sure that you're dealing with someone who has the system. That's it.
Okay, just curious. Okay, that's it. Thanks very much.
Let me go, we've got 3 counselors. I see hands up, and Counselor Getz, you had your hand up too. Let me come back to you and then go to the other 3. Counselor Getz, you want to say what you?
Oh, yes, I was actually. No, I actually, the 2 things I wanted to say was that I wanted to make sure that all of the illustrations that were on page 13 concurred with this new language. So just look at that, to make sure, have ISD look at it, and, it's just that the wordage, the verbiage in there is correct. Okay. And then I also wanted to say that Spires, 184 Spires, looks like it is in fact a pedestal. Everything else is a grade, and then I actually would sort of say that we are doing something supportive of the whole picture. This third piece that we have yet to discuss, the earth movement, is in my mind the next piece that needs to happen. So I just sort of feel as if people are not thinking that this is holistic, it very much in my mind is.
Okay, so let me come back now to Counselor Albright, Counselor Wright, and Counselor Oliver, and then I'd like to see if we can move to a vote on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 3 quick things. I can't remember what Counselor Oliver said anymore, but I think, as I recall when he was saying it, everything that he was saying was arguing for a more comprehensive approach, and I appreciated all of that. The second thing was that I appreciated Counselor Kelly's comment about you have to pay attention to the people in the back and what they're seeing, and that was a good point, and thank you for that. But finally, I wanted to say Clinton Street in Nonantum was approved by the Land Use Committee, and it was not a random thing that was done by right. And, when I looked at it, I looked at the architectural plans, and I went by and saw, and I actually talked to the man who was responsible for it. And he said, everything is in the plans. And it turns out that the architectural drawings do not accurately reflect what do you call it, the civic engineering plans show. So the grade change was in the civic plans, but did not show in the architectural drawings. And, to me, that shouldn't happen, because you look at the architectural drawings and you think you know what the project looks like. So I think the Land Use Committee will have to look a little bit deeper. They can't count on architectural drawings if they don't have to be accurate. And the height of the building was everything was there in the drawings. He's right. He built it to spec. Unfortunately, the architectural drawings did not reflect what the spec did reflect. So that's a problem that we have as as a planning staff and as a land use committee working together, reviewing these projects. So Clinton Street shouldn't have happened in the first place, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Albright. Councilor Oliver and then Councilor Wright.
Great, thank you, Chair. I will be quick this time. My apologies for the last rant. First, Councilor Oliver is not promoting a more comprehensive, lengthier review. Councilor Oliver would like to go more quickly. And I think the chair of our land use committee, if I understood the comments correctly, nailed it. We started to see more of these challenging projects with raising the grade once we started to mess with how we required retaining walls or not with special permits. So let's take that back. Let's make sure that we're actually fixing the challenge that we have in place. I believe that this will do it because, for example, 20 Clinton Street would not have happened with this in place, because we would have been measuring from original grade, which would be feet lower than what we have today, what is actually being built. Feet lower. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5.5, 6 feet, I think, lower, simply with this edit to our zoning. I think this is a critical step. I do want to see this go through as a step as we continue to work through things like, do we have basements? What do we think about SR versus MR? And where do we allow those kind of exceptions? But again, that's in front of us. What I'd like to see us take care of is this one thing right now, because it would have stopped Clinton Street. No questions asked. It totally would have short-stopped that project. And it would have been a much better project for the abutters, which in my opinion is a big part of zoning. We have to help protect the abutters to help them understand what could be built around them and what they can and can't build themselves. But anyway, I'm going to stop there because I could keep going, and I won't.
And I will recognize Councilor Wright for, I hope, for the last word before.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, I'll be real quick. My main question, I'll go offline with planning. And Clinton Street isn't built per plan. The retaining wall is way too big, and you're starting with the retaining wall and going up from there. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just comment. I think this is a worthwhile proposal. It will remedy some of the abuses we have. It won't remedy all of them, but I think it's a positive first step, and I hope the committee will support it. And I intend to. Okay, so anyone else wish to be heard so far? Yes.
On the pipeline
Yes.
question. So I looked, we've got about 86 engineering site plan permits that are currently active and in various stages of review. I don't know how many have recently been completed that have not yet applied for their building permit. But I do think the January 1st is a fair time, given that there's quite a few that are already in progress.
Okay, planning director.
Just briefly, I'd like to remind the zoning and planning committee of the esteemed garage ordinance and the difficulty we had with that in terms of enforcing that when we put it in place a little bit too soon. The number of homeowners that were stuck.
Well, this one I think is timed right, and if we vote it out, it will be an opportunity to do something soon. So let's assume that the item now is before us for vote in committee. All those in favor will say aye, and we'll try and make sure we get everybody counted.
Just to make sure we're okay, a motion to approve.
Motion to approve. And if you hold up your hand, and we'll do this so we can make sure we register everybody in the committee. So I have myself, Councilor Getz, trying to read Councilor Princeman, Councilor Oliver, Councilor Kalis, is Councilor Wright? I didn't see.
I'm sorry, I'm having problems raising my hand, but I'm a yay.
Oh, yeah, okay. And is that And then, all those opposed? All those abstaining? Councilor Albright's abstaining. Okay, you have that vote? We
Yes.
don't, I think that's 6-0-1. We don't have Councilor Danver, you correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
The item is approved.
All right, thank you. So the item passes and will come out to the full council at the next meeting. I do want to recognize the department to do a brief presentation about the complementary aspects we asked them to look at, because I think this is important, and then go to the tear down so that we'll have at least, I hope, a good time to deal with the last issues on Birdo. We're not going to vote Birdo tonight. We're going to talk about any last questions and then bring it to the council in September when we have a full complement of people on the council. And something of this scope, I don't think is wise to try and pass and not having everybody fully understand what we're doing. Who's going to take on the? Okay, please identify yourself again for everybody.
Yes. My name is Nora Massler, and I'm an associate planner on the long range planning team here in Newton. Great. Yeah, next slide. And then one more after that. So it was raised briefly earlier, but the first sort of parallel amendment that we're talking with you all today about is earth moving ordinances. Next slide. Earth moving bylaws or ordinances regulate the amount of earth that can be removed or filled into a site based off of specific parameters, typically the amount of earth being moved and the reason the earth being moved, and sometimes the zoning district as well. Next slide. The purpose of earth moving ordinances include preventing erosion and sedimentation to protect land and water quality by controlling soil movement, supporting public safety by increasing stability of land and infrastructure, protecting natural habitats by supporting the preservation of local ecosystems, and maintaining a consistent topographic appearance. Next slide. Looking at 3 examples of municipalities with earth-moving ordinances in the area, both Concord and Wayland regulate the amount in cubic yards of earth which can move to and from a site, while Weston focuses on removal specifically, so not fill, and requires that the amount of materials removed does not exceed the amount imported for various construction activities. So that includes the construction of driveways, septic systems, and the construction of foundation for new homes is exempt from the regulation. Considering our discussion of height today, we took a look at what each of these municipalities have as their definition of height. And you'll see that given both Concord and Weston measure height from original grade, it indicates to us that these towns are not relying exclusively on earth removal ordinances to avoid increased height through infill. Next slide. This is likely, at least in part, because most earth removal ordinances do not regulate earth moving within a site. They regulate earth moving to and from a site. So this graphic shows what would be regulated under an earth removal ordinance. Next slide. So it's earth going from lot A to lot B. Next slide. But they do not regulate earth moving within a site. So if you go next, here you can see if a home were demolished and earth were excavated to create space for a new larger foundation. Next slide. That earth could then be used to manipulate the grade on the site. Next slide. To create a larger home, and this would not fall under an earth removal ordinance or earth moving ordinance. Ultimately, an earth moving ordinance is really for the reasons outlined at the start, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.
And I'm just gonna
So,
A
yeah.
couple more parallel amendments as well.
Okay.
So I think this was really, again, this and the other pieces are really meant to get at what Councilor Albright and Councilor Kelly were talking about. Is that I think the things that have been done or could be done in tandem to really further get at the desired outcomes that we're looking to see. So one of those pieces is retaining walls. If you go to the next slide. So in April, we proposed and the council approved that any retaining wall over 4 feet in height on a site requires a special permit. And there's been discussions about the impacts on particularly multifamily or commercial development where a fully below grade driveway to subgrade parking is, these are just a few examples of in Newton and around Newton, where this is the case where the retaining wall anywhere on the site is essentially fully below grade. But because you're digging down, there are portions of that wall that are over 4 feet. And so the idea here is if we're saying, well, we don't want to not allow, some of these projects that are going to be producing, things like affordable housing, is that we might want to make an exception and say, hey, what we're really talking about here is single and two family homes, and that there might be an appropriate exemption or differentiation between multifamily housing, particularly when those walls are fully below grade. Go to the next slide. Just again, another example, this is in West Newton. Obviously, at the very end of that driveway, that wall gets to be 6-7 feet. It's not impactful, but this would require a special permit with how we've defined this change, and we think this could be an appropriate amendment. Next slide.
That would have been true before the amendment we just did on retaining walls, right? Because it would be above, it was in the setback and above.
In the setback.
It's a business zone. I don't know if it was in the setback or
okay.
not.
Maybe not.
The project itself required a special permit,
Yeah.
but now that we do have multifamily allowed by right in the village center zoning to truly make it by right, you may need to address the retaining wall.
And I'm not saying that Trio should be a by right project, but there is in the back, a driveway going to below grade parking where there are walls that are over 4 feet. Those are not impactful. Next slide. Same thing with 28 Austin. I'm not saying that 28 Austin should be by right, but it shouldn't require a special permit for something like the ramp going to the below grade parking. Next slide. Another piece that was talked about here is the definition of two family attached. This has to do, this was a proposal we put forward in 2021. It failed to pass in the council. And it's really, if we can update this definition of how living space touches living space, we might be able to get at the allowance of two family development. I think this is what some of the building professional groups were concerned about. In a way that doesn't require over manipulating the grade. Next slide. A similar change would be to potentially consider, well, in multi-resident zones, we allow two family homes. There might be an option here where we would allow the same amount of FAR, the same amount of square footage that's allowed in a single structure with 2 units in it, but to have two single family structures, not additional FAR, not additional square footage, but just broken up. And this is an example on Lowell Ave where there's a lot that has 2 single family structures compared to 2 units. This plus the definition of two family changes would have greatly altered what happened at Chase Breland. The reason why Chase Breland is having massive retaining walls is that it can have by right a 2-unit structure within one structure. That's it. But it is not allowed to have by right 2 single family buildings with the same amount of square footage that respond to the different grade in the front and in the back. So again, this is just a possibility. But I think it's one that will end up with a better form or design outcome. If you don't allow more square footage, more FAR, you just allow it to be broken up. I think that's the last slide we have. It's just possibilities that could be docketed after this how we measure height goes forward.
Thank you. I think that I do remember from my prior incarnations, we had a lot of conversations about how much buildings had to be attached to be attached.
yes,
Remember
yes.
the whole, the famous Linguini conversation. But I think that these are important possibilities. I think that they merit study. I would like this to make sure that we get the first stage done. Because I think that's the foundation of doing something. And until we get that, I want to make sure that we do that first. But any comments, Councilor Wright, and then Councilor Getz, and then I'd like to move on to the next item, which is also sort of comprehensive, and some of these may play into that. Councilor Wright?
So, our proposed change just earlier about original grade, how would you measure if you had two buildings on a lot, original grade? So the Braylon Chase, how would that be measured on that second unit? Is original grade where that second unit was located?
Correct.
If they were broken up into two separate buildings,
Yeah,
then each building would be measured separately.
Each building would have their own average grade that's measured around that particular building footprint based on the original grades. So you would have one building that would be, set down further than the other building. The way our two-family definition works today is if you're doing two-family on a sloped lot, it really requires you to do significant grading to create a flat site large enough for the two-family, rather than working with the grade and stepping down or up.
okay. Well, and that's sort of with Clinton too, correct? Because they had to do the retaining wall, because it's a much longer building in the back.
Clinton doesn't follow the same rules because that was single family attached, which has doesn't go by the two-family definition.
Okay.
You don't have the same
Okay.
requirement of living space, touching living, and the ridge line requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to move on unless there's any, Councilor Getz.
Yeah, now I actually, this needs a lot of digest and a lot of thought throughness of it. I actually, the through lots and the ones that have frontage on two different streets are really problematic, especially with such a shift or such a high amount of grade change. I really appreciate hearing that, in fact, if they were split, they would be then each having their own original grade. That's really a plus. But I'm a little bit concerned about all the other sort of criteria that are on the lots, like things like, no loss, because you've now got two buildings. And so they're gonna have, we want them to have shared driveways. We want to minimize the number of curb cuts. We also would want to minimize the amount of, impervious surface.
Right.
And we would like to minimize the loss of open space. So there's a kind of second tier of issues, with this consideration. And then moving back to the other one, the one that has to do with the earth movement. I, saw a lot more communities that had earth movement ordinances. So this is yet another piece that I think is third leg in terms of the other work. Just because I believe that, this is a very important piece. So I would love to see something on that docket.
So why don't we, I'll continue, the chair and the vice chair, I and the vice chair will confer with the planning department after we have this discussion. Let's see how we get done with the first change. I'd like to make sure we can absorb one change before I go into second stage, or we go into second stage. Okay, Councilor Wright, your hand is up. Is that still up for, or are you done? Okay. If not, I would,
I'm done, sorry.
you're done, okay. So I appreciate the conversation, that's all part of the same docket item. What I'd like to do is move on to the next two items, and we are appreciative that we have our consultants here as well. And this is item 8524, request for discussion and possible amendments to enhance the preservation of existing homes. And then 4124, amend the setbacks in MR zones to encourage preservation of existing buildings. And we have had multiple discussions on these items and held them each time, hoping that we can move forward in a way that will enable us to address an issue that a number of us have heard from our constituents over and over again about the loss of smaller, less expensive structures to bigger, more expensive structures. And the gentrification that implies, as people have talked about, the loss of, I can't say it's affordable, but less expensive housing opportunity, and what we can do about that. And the planning department, to its credit, has been working, looking back at some of the experience we had, but also trying to think forward how we get through this, because this does require multiple perspectives, and we're grateful for Shalom and his colleague for being here. And maybe who's going to introduce this? Shalom, okay.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
What I'm hoping I can do here is touch upon the work plan that was put forward in the Friday packet. I think the conversation we were just having goes to show that we may have exhausted all of the kind of quick wins that are out there to address the concerns and the needs that are being put forward by the city council. And within this work plan, I think working very closely with our consultants at UTIL and sub-consultants as well to get at what we believe is a comprehensive solution to looking at the development possibilities within the single and multi-resident zones, which cover well over 90% of the city's parcels. We have put forward, I don't know if you would like, if it makes sense to put up the timeline in the memo.
The timeline may be the only thing that you can
That's probably,
show.
and that's all that I want to touch upon. And I think after going through at a high level, what we think we can do in this 9-month project, turning it back over to the chair of the committee to hear questions and respond to what's kind of most pressing to all of you, is that, so with no kind of preconceived notions here, we're trying to take this 9-month approach to hear from the council, hear from councilors on their issues, their needs that need to be addressed. Come forward in September with an initial review and analysis of our current regulations. From that, moving in to clearly identifying aspects of the existing zoning code as well as other regulations and ordinances. And then from there, recommending changes. And at every step of the way, again, given that this is impacting the vast majority of the city, collaborate with the city council, with the community, have various touch points. And I think what I want to highlight before turning it back over to the committee is that in this comprehensive, streamlined, abridged, whatever words you want to use, is that we think at the end of this year, we can come forward with some draft recommendations to the committee, either zoning and or other city ordinances to be put forward for consideration.
Mike, and just to give you a sense of the timeline, because of the council's own internal calendar, we hit budget after about 3 months in the spring. Effectively, this is our window of doing something that we think will get done in time to get meaningful impact in the community. And we also want to make sure that we get enough time and inform people who are in the pipeline of what they have in mind. So we're delighted to have Mr. Love and your colleague here. And would you like to introduce yourself again for the record for those who do not know you and your firm and your role in this conversation?
Sure. My name is Tim Love. I'm the founding principal of UTIL. We're a planning, urban design, and architecture practice located very close to the Chinatown Gate in downtown Boston. And some of you will remember our role in the Village Center zoning initiative that included studies, alternatives, and then finally landing the plane. So we were the city's consultant for that and spent a lot of that time reviewing analyses, alternatives, with Zap. And so we were a regular guest at Zap, through that whole process. And I think the experience we gain doing that will, I think, mean that we can make this relatively efficient and land the plane in the timeframe, Counselor, that you're talking about.
Okay, but you're, what I'm implicit is that you're part of this conversation as we go forward.
Yes.
You're not just showing up tonight and saying hello.
No, I'm not.
I just wanted
If you
to-
see me on, at Zap meetings when we're talking about this, Lauren and I will be here. Lauren, why don't you introduce yourself?
On that note, hello, everyone. I see some familiar, some new faces. My name is Lauren McCourt, and I am an architect and urban designer. I work closely with Tim on a lot of these issues. Was very intimately familiar with the village center zoning process. So you'll be seeing me as we go forward in these meetings in the months ahead.
And I think that, let me just preface before we go to comments from members of the committee. I think part of the challenge is that we worked in, and you advised us to get to the MBTA community compliance, which involved additional development opportunity. This may involve less development opportunity. And so, but it's all part of building the fabric of the community we want and not have it just happen episodically. And because again, this is, several people have commented at the very outset of this meeting, part of what people find remarkable about Newton is it's variegated but still consistent flavor as a city neighborhood. So let me recognize the vice chair and then Councilor Albright. I'm sorry. The vice chair, I know I have some comments.
Great, thank you, Chair. Excuse me, I just wanted to clarify something I heard a minute ago from Mr. Lamel. I think I heard you say you believe that the timeline would allow us or allow your team to bring recommendations back to the committee by end of year. Did I hear that right?
Correct.
And then, so I guess I'm not seeing any one of these kind of colored timeline bars that kind of lead to that. Can you kind of steer me to which of these line items that would be a part of?
Happy to, and obviously folks at UT will jump in at any moment. So I think what we want to do is come similar in September, looking at case studies, right? Looking at typical or representative projects within these single residence and multi-resident zones that have occurred and break down how those have occurred from a zoning perspective. What were the financial reasonings for that, you know, the market factors, what other regulations that are on the books that led to the development that we ended up getting to, and then having a discussion in committee of, oh, that these are the things that we don't like of that, these are the things that we do like, or but we have a really strong understanding of why that's happening. That's task 2, and then task 3, I think, is talking through those with you, with the committee, presenting them again to the council, to the community, and saying again, that's why we're getting the result that we're getting to. Once we've understood that and the problems that are at play, we can propose tweaks and amendments and recommendations, be it, you know, the language that's in this document around setbacks or FAR or what have
you. I think to just the idea is we try and cook some things in the committee first before we get to the public hearing stage. Public hearing stage is when we've actually got some draft amendments that we think have viability, but we don't want to go to that point until we know that we've got something that looks like it has a chance of not just policy success, but political success in the sense of getting the sufficient votes to pass it. Councilor Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to understand something about this timeline, because it talks about July and August as the time you're going to hear directly from city councilors. on the principle, that's not this meeting, right?
That's this meeting really, because next meeting is about climate change, which you're helping run. And, but the opportunity for members of the committee to share ideas, not only tonight, but in this period of time, because this is a rare opportunity where the planning department is not on deck for the next zoning and planning meeting formally. They have vacation time, but this is a chance for them to do some homework on this so that they can come to us in September. Is Mr. Lemon?
I would also just say to that you know, these items have been brought up throughout this year, and so we have been hearing from you. You know, February, March, April, these were on the agenda, and so it's not that we've forgotten those things. So that's one, and then as the chair said, our door is always open for the next few months. And
No, I mean, since this is a comprehensive approach, I really like this idea. I have to be consistent with myself at least. The one thing that bothered me a little bit was a discussion that we could have as a group, as a committee, about, you know, what is it that we don't like about big houses? Do we not like big houses if they're on big lots, or do we only not like big houses when they encroach on the neighbors? I would love to have a little bit of a more comprehensive conversation about that. And maybe we could sneak one in at some point in a near meeting with us, just to get a little bit more consensus from our committee about what it is we like and don't like, and what it is we're really looking for from these two original docket items.
Well, I think that's a fair question. I think part of the question is what is replaced in the process. The big house by itself might not be a problem, but it's replacing generally a smaller house. And the issue is that a desirable outcome in that context? So it's a dynamic rather than just a static analysis. But I think when the case studies come back, we'll have a better feeling for that question, which is, I think, a sensitive one you've asked.
Yeah, I mean, I think the September meetings will be both us teeing up the case studies and a conversation and feedback from all of you about what you like or don't like about the case studies we're presenting. Because we're not going to be directional yet when we present those. It's like, on this lot, this used to be the house. This got built. We were presuming that the value of tearing down the house and building a new one overcame the embedded value of the property, and probably because the FAR is too permissive, right? And so we're also going to, in that case study analysis, figure out what dimensional standard in your zoning is allowing projects to be big enough to overcome the embedded value of the existing house. And so that diagnostic will provide some conceptual understanding of what's going on, but we can also have a more qualitative discussion about how much we like the old house and don't like the new one, and whether it fits in or not. That can be all part of the same conversation.
And I'd be looking at the first meeting in September to have that conversation. When is our first meeting in September?
September 9th.
No. So that's when I would like to be able to at least start that conversation. I don't think it will happen every meeting, but I'd like to have at least the initial conversation that night if we could.
So if I could just suggest one house to add to your case studies, and because I look at it and I think about it all the time when I walk by it, and it's an area that right by City Hall, there was a house on the corner of Walnut and, oh gosh, I don't remember the name of the street, right by where the place is that sells cemetery markers. Yeah, there was a house torn down and a 2.5-story house was built. And the context is there are modest houses near it. And it's so out of context with the modest houses, but on the other hand, it's in context with other houses that are in their larger neighborhood. So I would love to have you look at that particular house as one of your case studies, because it was a tear down and it's a bigger house, but does it work or doesn't it work? Because I can't decide myself. So that's my suggestion for one of your case studies.
And I think part, as I say, part of the challenge is not just whether the outcome works, it's what it did away with to get there.
It changes the profile of the housing stock more generally.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's part of the rationale for, I think we're hearing is that there really is a demographic shift built into this development pattern. Even if the new house might be perfectly fine and in a kind of a standalone basis, we're losing the housing stock that we have as the sort of entry for many families that would otherwise never have a chance here. So I think that's part of the economic dimension of this in a sense. Okay, Councilor Getz?
Yeah, the one piece that I think that is really important to think about is the value, just in terms of an environmental perspective. Just, because I know that, this is sort of difficult to talk through, but it's just that, the trees have a certain amount of value in terms of environmental, in the sense of like their carbon sequestration, all of the, the storm water. And I don't know whether or not we want to get into that depth, but there's the implications environmentally that are overall benefit for the community. So that's the kind of piece and the level that I'm interested in exploring. So it ties into stormwater.
Right.
And then the other piece of it is demolition, and the cost of demolition, both in terms of environmental and the value of reuse, and this again is from an environmental perspective. So these are, I don't even know if you have the tools or the ability to sort of, or even the, beyond the financials of the market. I'm more interested in the original fabric of the community, the value of that, and then also that we are so unique because we have gone through so much development, and we were a suburb of Boston, so that we have architects and their work standing in our community. And there's value to that.
Well, maintaining an existing structure is more sustainable than tearing it down and building a new thing. So
Yeah.
as a point of principle, I think that can be considered. We're not scoped to do any kind of detailed embedded carbon analysis.
Right.
Even with the case studies, but I think there are some more qualitative principles that I think the plan is for the people on this committee, the council on this committee to discuss, which is, as a kind of point of principle that might be an issue along with the kind of financial, the kind of real estate economics that we are going to be looking at as part of this.
And one element I just would add to the mix here, the historic districts in the city we talked about earlier tonight, and I don't think you were here, but have been sort of interesting case studies of preservation on a mini scale because it's very hard to tear a building down in a historic district. And that's led to some ingenuity in architectural design that I think has been positive for those areas, which may be instructive in other contexts, even though they're not historic districts. We're not advocating or creating citywide historic districts, but I think the point is that it is possible to as several of our candidates talked about this morning, renovate but still update. And the question is, what are the incentive systems that enable that to happen?
We have some of those incentives in the MRT district as part of the Village Center Zone that you can do additions, but they have to be 20 feet off the front face, and you can only do an addition that equals to only 25% of the footprint of the existing. And there are some tools much later in the process from the Village Center Zone, and some aspects of it might be worth exploring in addition to other tools, limiting footprints, those kinds of things.
And just lastly, I'd like to sort of think about, in incentivizing density without, so that you actually would be modular, or you would do something with the existing, so that you would then get the benefit, like what we see in the MRT of, if in fact you want to increase the density on that lot, you keep the original, and, you're very pro environmental in the sense of thinking of the reuse of the property. So ways to incentivize that.
So anyway, I think, I want to be cautious personally, but that was my own view of of looking at this as another development incentive. I want to think about it as a preservation incentive that enables positive development.
Yeah, I don't completely understand that, and I don't think these districts are the right place. I mean, it's an issue of, this might be seen as the alter ego of the village centers in a way, which the village centers are geared to promote kind of appropriately designed multifamily housing and housing over retail. And I think these districts want to, as much as possible, I would think, preserve existing structures, maybe allow for additions, for all the reasons that I think that you and some of the councilors are interested in. So we understand the mission here.
Okay, I appreciate that. Any comments further from other councilors? You can take the chart down if you have anybody.
Yes.
Any hands up? I haven't seen. Councilor Campos. Sorry.
So one thing I want to know is to what extent we're losing the diversity of our housing stock. You know, Susan, Councilor Albright, posed the question, what do we have against big houses? I don't have anything against big houses, but part of the allure of moving to Newton was the diversity of housing stock, was the diversity of economic echelons that we have, of people that are here. And to me, that's important. And that's important in docketing any of these items. And I just don't know. I'm kind of guessing that we are losing the diversity of that housing stock. And it's important, I think, that we maintain it. And I guess I don't have anything against these large houses, but when I see them completely taking over Oak Hill Park or places where there were modest houses, it saddens me. And it seems like there's not a place for people that are starting out or not at the upper echelons of firms or making money. And I want Newton to be better than that. So that to me is part of why this is important.
Okay. Well, I think we've got a plan to move forward. We look forward to hearing from you in September. Let's target the first meeting so that we can get a running start on this. And I would entertain a motion to hold on these two items. Don't forget to move hold. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? The ayes have it. Okay, and thank you very much for taking the time to come this evening. Sure, Lauren. Nice to see you. Okay, I think that takes care of the planning department. I'm trying to get you guys out of here before too late. But I'm going to suggest we take just a brief recess to get set up for Mr. Ferguson, and we can go into the Birdo discussion. All right, so take a bar break and be back as soon as you can, and we'll start. Thank you.
Hello, puppy.
Susan, we can still hear you.
Well, then I love my dog.
That's right. I'm going to find mine right now.
Mr. Ferguson? No, I can put him up on.
Hello.
Thank you for your patience. And we're glad to see you.
Good to see you.
So let me just read this item into the record. This is item 4224, request for discussion and ordinance to require energy use reporting. And this is otherwise known as BERDO. We've had extensive discussion in committee. We've had also an extensive public comment period. And what the purpose of this meeting was to give you an opportunity as our principal staff representative to respond to the comments that were made at the public hearing. You've provided us an extensive written document in response to those issues. But I wanted to make sure that we had a chance for members of the committee and others on the council who have further questions so that we can move this item forward to a vote in September in the committee and get it out to the council then. I didn't want to do it over the summer when we might not have a full complement of members of the committee here or the councilors to vote on this, because this is an item that's going to affect a large chunk of the city in a way that I think we really need to have all hands on deck for it. So I wanted to give a chance for that conversation to go forward in a staged and orderly way. But so let me pause for a minute and just ask if there are members of the committee who have any questions before I turn it over to Mr. Ferguson. I also note that we're joined by a number of representatives of the Energy Commission, I believe, which we're delighted to have you here. That we had a public comment period for that, and we appreciated your testimony, but we also regard you as an important resource to the community because you've been instrumental in getting this to this stage. Members of the committee before I turn it over to Mr. Ferguson?
Councilor Kale.
Councilor Kale. Yes.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I missed the last meeting. I have one question though, and you can tell me, you know what, we'll get to it later. But it's really around this idea of multifamily housing and whether that is included in this or not.
It is not at the moment. There is an amendment that has been offered by Councilor Danberg, thank you, which we've held in a sense until we got to the point of actually acting as a committee on this item. Right now, we're just trying to make sure we have all of the information and understand the implications of the various options before us. But that item has not been decided in the committee. It is a live question. I mean, the language, we had drafted language that would make that change to add the residential component to the initial commercial component, but that has not yet been decided.
Okay. I mean, it seems to me that we would, determine the scope of what we're talking about here and then come to some type of conclusion. But it seems like we're meandering a little bit with the scope, and then we'll get to I'm not sure, conclusion or not, but however you want to lead it.
We've meandered. I just think we've had people comment about it, and I fully expect to vote on her amendment in September.
Okay.
But she's not here, and I don't want to try and articulate her argument for her. I think she ought to have the opportunity to do that.
Okay.
But I fully expect this. We have to decide that as a committee and then make a full recommendation of the council. So I don't view it as meandering. I just don't think we have the right player here and the right time to do that.
Got it.
So, Mr. Ferguson, with that, any other member of the committee? What I'd like you to take us through a couple of the things that you feel are salient for us to understand in response to the concerns. And we also, I should point out, got a copy of today by email that Ms. Norton sent to us. And I asked her to forward it to you, a comment of the Mr. Capasso, was it? Who had made some extensive comments at the public comment period and had provided them in writing. You also have had the comments from the Chamber of Commerce to which you have articulated response, and also I should note for the record, I asked to be attached to the agenda, the case study for the church project that, thank you to the members of the Energy Commission who helped put that together, because that really is important. We have a large number of structures in the city that are nonprofit, not just in fact, but in form, and they need to be accounted for appropriately. So, Mr. Ferguson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Baker. What I provided you with a memo, which was in the Friday packet. And what that memo does is it updates the committee on what actions we're taking to prepare answers to all the questions that were raised at the June 10th public hearing. Our plan is to have answers to all those questions and to focus on certain areas that seem to be the most important with a presentation in September, which answers some of the more key questions that have surfaced. So this memo lists everything we're working on to prepare for the September meeting. I don't know if you would like me to go through it item by item, or my suggestion is this, that the committee members could take a look at this memo. If there's anything that you think is missing or that you would like us to expand on, you could contact me and by email, or I'd be glad to talk to any counselor on the phone and make sure that questions that you need answers to in September are addressed. So that would be my suggestion. Otherwise, and I also want to add Greg Riebman, the president and CEO of Charles River Chamber, who I think everybody knows, sent a good letter with a lot of good questions the day after the June 10th public hearing to Councilors Baker and Oliver, and I've responded with answers, and I think the questions are good and the answers are good, and they go, I think, maybe a long way towards meeting some of the questions that have been on the minds of councilors and the public. And also, I think I'm going to have time to expand on some of those answers for the September meeting. So how would you?
Well, I think what I would like to do, rather than have you go through it tonight, because certainly the document speaks for itself, but there are other pieces that you want to add. And what I would like to do is to use this opportunity to just make sure that if members of the council don't have questions now, but on reflection would like to make sure that they get them to you, and we can maybe have a moment in time that by which they need to get to you, in a sense, so that the inquiry is complete, and then you can make a comprehensive memo, which we would then have an opportunity to discuss at the next meeting in anticipation of moving to a vote on this when we take it up. We'll either do it the first or the second meeting in September, but I have to sort of look at the calendar of what we've got to deal with. But I do think that I would like not to have the full council look back and say, you didn't ask this question, you didn't answer this question. I'd like to make sure that we've got as full a record as we can, because I don't want to have a matter of this consequence sort of hung up on something we didn't ask. But I'm open to members of the committee and how they'd like to proceed. Councilor Getz, and then I'll go back up to Councilor Albright and Councilor Kaler.
So, I really appreciated the last memo where you had the tables and the visuals, you know, just in terms of they were very helpful explainers. And now I'm seeing in here, in terms of your responses to Greg Reedman, there was quite a interspersed in your responses was the regulatory, construct. I would love to see that. And I would love to be able to link on it and to be able to interpret that so that it's sort of like the overruling control, you know, and those timelines. It would be great to have the links as well as a visual of it, because it's dictating in my thinking what needs to happen by when, you know, and I think that because I'm teasing it out of this document, but if we could just get, you know, just a live document that can link us to this content, that would be really helpful. And then I actually very much appreciated your responses, but I also want to step back a little bit and understand the full implementation of Berto and how that's sort of thought through in terms of when the residential, I know it's a year later, you know, the residential properties, but is there any thought being put to that? Because I don't want to be not thinking about that at the same time as this piece goes through.
Well, we've decided to come back in a year and you know, amend the proposal that we submitted to add residential buildings over 20,000 square feet. We haven't changed our position on that, although we're getting a lot of questions about the residential sector that we're trying to respond to, and we've been working on, as you know, the case study with Mr. Capasso. We've been working with him since October. We knew that we wouldn't have all the answers until you know, perhaps later in the year, later in this year, which is kind of one of the reasons we thought we should wait till next year to submit an amendment for the residential sector. We're also doing some work with the housing authorities, and we don't have information now that we would have later to help us present a more factual account of how affordable housing will be affected. So those are reasons we wanted to wait a year, and it doesn't affect the timelines for implementation of the residential sector programs. By waiting a year, the dates don't change. It's just giving us, it was just to give us a year to get more information together. So that's our rationale for that.
You're saying, but I think when you put together the sort of comprehensive presentation memo and for the September meeting, I think again to highlight the rationale for the delay and what is being, the sort of work plan that is anticipated. Because again, part of the understanding, I mean, people may disagree and we may reach a different conclusion. I don't want to prejudge that, but I just want to mention that I think that the idea here is that there is more information that is still in the process of being generated that won't be available in September, but wouldn't necessarily preclude the ordinance from being adopted now. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not a matter that we have to wait till all these pieces of information are available to do something. At least that's my understanding. So let me go to members of the committee who are on the screen who've got their hand raised. Councilor Kalis and then Councilor Albright.
The only thing, oh, I think you should go to Councilor Albright first. I already spoke.
I would, you're absolutely right. Apologies, Councilor Albright. Your just hand was to the right and I was going and reading them from left to right, not from top to bottom. Okay.
So, thank you. I would be happy to hear Councilor Kalis's questions. First, I wanted to say, Mr. Ferguson, thank you for all the work that you've done on this. Thank you for all of the explanations and further education for the community. It's been very helpful. What I'm concerned about is with the amendment that Councillor Danberg has put forward for multifamily housing, and with the concerns of Mr. Capasso, I'm wondering how will we resolve that in our minds as counselors to vote on that amendment if we don't have more information? You know, like the case study that was provided to us on, I forget the name of the church in West Newton. That was extremely helpful. It walked us through all the steps and what works when and what works into the future. And you know, is there any way for someone to provide us the information about multifamily housing? Because frankly, you give them a year off, so to speak, but the timelines for when they have to comply don't really change.
Right.
So it's almost like it's relevant now as it will be a year from now. And I think you need to help us by giving us a way to think about this and understand, are there any loan programs? Are there any grant programs? Are there any, I mean, maybe because of the situation with our federal elections that you can't even know the answer to this right now, but are Mr. Capasso's questions valid? Are we going to eviscerate all affordable units from going into the future in order to accomplish what we think is really, really important, and it's the survival of our world? I think you need to help us between now and September, or I don't know how we can vote on that particular amendment.
Well, I am working on that. It was our intention to focus on the commercial sector, but because of the questions that have been raised, we're trying to advance our schedule for getting answers to those types of questions. And I think right now we had two outstanding questions. One of them I've actually been able to get an answer to, and that is the incentive from National Grid for the 181 Lexington project. So that was really one of two outstanding questions. And the other question has to do with the cost of a service upgrade, electrical service upgrade. And just so you know, I've been working with Dante Capasso since last October. He's given us access to his buildings and his data. So we're working together on this. And we helped him prepare a work order application to Eversource to determine what the cost of a electrical service upgrade would be for that project. So that's in the works, and that's really kind of the last piece of information that we need to have a complete factual study. So that's the only piece missing. And if we get it, we'll have a complete study. If we get it by September, if we don't, we might have to make an estimate to go along with that. And I think we'll be able to provide some insights into that issue in September that will help the council make.
I think one of the things that we'll work with you, Mr. Ferguson, is just on the timing. If it turns out that I'd like to do this in September. If it turns out the second meeting is better than the first, then in terms of being able to get a complete record, then I'd rather you have the complete record so that Councilor Albright's question would be resolved if at all possible. Because I think she makes a good point. We're being asked as a matter of policy to do something different from your recommendation, but we need to know the implications of that.
Right.
And that's an important issue. So I'm sorry, now let me go back to Councilor Kalish.
So, my question was really around what Councilor Albright was asking, but going back to Mr. Ferguson, I mean, I think your memo is terrific, but the whole issue about the Capasso situation, it just feels like there were two simple things that we needed to get. And is that it? Like, it seems to me that we're gonna have more questions in September. That, are you looking at the scenarios and all the different questions that could come up to anticipate questions so we can actually make a decision? Or are you just focused on these 2 points, A and B?
No, we'll be looking at, how we think it's gonna impact rents and kind of, alternatives, for, complying that will, help soften, the impact on, rents. And also we're looking at, the cost of gas in the future and how that's gonna affect operating costs for, for apartment building owners, for landlords that decide to, stay with fossil fuel heating instead of converting.
And is Eversource the only game in town for point B that you have in your memo?
For what now? For,
You say working with Mr. Capasso to prepare and submit a work order.
oh yeah, for the, yes, it has to come from them. They're the
Has to come
ones
from them.
that,
So,
that
so what,
has- yeah.
does this include the potential of if Mr. Capasso uses solar?
No, it has to be an electrical service from, Eversource's delivery system.
Okay, but what if he adds solar to it?
I mean, solar, that's another cost. It would have to have a battery.
It's just, it's just an example. I just want to
Yeah.
make sure that you're thinking outside the box to make
Yeah.
sure that you're kind of anticipate, because if you add solar, then that's a whole other way of generating electricity, and it could reduce costs in some way. And I'm sure somebody's going to bring that up. So I'd like to anticipate that type of question.
Okay, I mean, I don't think solar is gonna be less expensive than electric service
And
upgrade.
you're probably right. You're probably right. But it's just an example, though. I don't want to get to September and then be like, oh well, we then have to go get other information. I'm trying to see, can we kind of foresee where this is going as best possible?
Yeah, well, there isn't enough room on his roof to provide nearly enough electricity to run, an electric heat pump system.
Right, but you should look at this as an example and talk to us about, if this was a building that had more roof space and could add solar, then this is what the impact would be. Just so we have as much information as possible to then be able to make educated decisions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Leary.
Thank you very much. The last part of Councilor Kalos's comment made me think about the building codes as well, in terms of some of the answers are tied in with that, but that's sort of another discussion. What I really wanted to get more information on, Mr. Ferguson, was I think the big question is the cost, and Mr. Reedman had made that comment, and I saw your answer, the city's response. And then you started to answer that in greater detail as well, which I think is really important. When 100 years ago, we had all coal, then we moved to oil, then we moved to gas. And I see this as a natural next step is moving to heat pumps and fossil-free technologies. And we do have to do this to comply with state law, or the Commonwealth, and our own goals. But I also know that this sort of came up when we were back in June, particularly when we were talking about Mr. Capasso's building. we have, yes, there will be some cost, but it's also likely, we have to remember that there's regular maintenance and regular replacement of equipment that has to be done. And we're giving people time to plan, be thoughtful when they're planning for and we need to, I want to make sure we're catching more people, especially some of the churches. I think, for example, Our Lady's recently replaced their old natural gas boiler with a new one. Unfortunately, fairly recently. And I want to make sure all those, particularly nonprofits and houses of worship, get this information. I know that's already started, and that there are definitely organizations and groups working within the houses of worship, including my husband, actually. But I think it's really important to talk about the natural, moving forward, that things need to be replaced. We need to put more highly efficient heating and cooling systems in place. There will be savings to the occupants. I mean, particularly when we're talking about the concern about raising rents. So I would like a lot, as much detail as possible on the impacts. You mentioned the cost of natural gas is predicted to go up, for example, and so then there's also the cost of doing nothing. So I just want to make sure we're addressing that, because the cost factor, which I heard mentioned, but from a few people, including some of the other counselors who've had experience with their own properties, that
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, but I think we do have to get used to the fact that right now it's going to cost more to convert to heat pumps in most cases than it is to put in a new boiler. However, over time, and as you said, if you do your system replacement at end of life of your fossil fuel boilers, then that helps with the economics. And also, as I mentioned, over time, gas costs are going to increase to the point where I have a chart that I'm going to present on September 24th that shows gas it's going to be like 3 or 4 times more to heat with gas than it is with heat pumps. So what happens? Instead of spending money on capital costs to upgrade your buildings to heat pumps, you end up spending money on operating costs for gas and have like the worst of both worlds. You end up owning a building that is obsolete, being heated with gas, and costing more to operate. That's really what we're headed for. But when you look at the economics today, they don't look that great. But the economics as we go into the future are going to change. And building owners need to prepare for that. Berto helps them do that. Berto gives them the framework to start moving towards buildings that will be state-of-the-art buildings, will be more valuable buildings, will ultimately, over the long run, end up being cheaper to operate. And I mean, the value of reducing carbon and addressing global warming is immense. I mean, the cost of global warming is immense. And not doing anything and kicking the can down the road to the next generation does not seem like the kind of option that City of Newton or this council is going to want to support. I mean, that's by not passing this ordinance, we're kicking the can down the road. And what's the worst part about kicking the can down the road is you get to the point of no return. There's a point at which global warming can't be reversed. And so we've got to take action before we reach that point.
If I can just interject, I think, though, that that is a general policy argument in favor of the ordinance, but the question that I'm hearing people ask is, you made an argument that the ordinance actually facilitates local cost savings in the long run to a property owner, leaving aside the environmental benefit, which is, you articulated well. And so I think what the committee members are asking is to make sure we have a model that explains that, because the public is going to be saying, well, wait a minute, we're paying the cost in order to save the planet, but nobody is paying our cost to do that. And if you're able to demonstrate that it's cost effective for the property owner in addition to beneficial for the planet, then you've got a double win, as opposed to saying we all need to sacrifice for the general good. And so I think what members of the committee are asking for is the framework to make that case on the individual basis as well as the global basis. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, that is, and I was thinking also of renters who will no longer have onerous utility costs as well. That's another important point with buildings that are, when you don't have gas or oil for heat.
I mean, I think the perception that we've gotten from some of the comments, and I think that part of the value of your work is to clarify and rebut those concerns, is that a property owner is being asked not to build something new, when you're talking about somebody building something new, but they have existing property that they've got to spend money on to retrofit. And if that expense is going to be borne, why should I do that for the general good, is the question that gets asked us. Now, we may say, well, it's just in, the planet requires it, but I think you've got a better response to that, as I hear it, which is that these are actually cost-effective changes for the property owner to make, and they can be done and staged in a way that enables those changes to be beneficial to the property owner and the tenants as well as to the planet. This is
their investment in the building.
yeah, an investment in the building. So you're getting a return on your investment that you might not otherwise get if you're just staying with an expensive operating system. Right? I mean, that's the
I think that's the long-term benefit. I think if somebody was going to, the reality is if somebody did it today, they'd have to increase their rents to cover the costs. So there's ways of doing that. For instance, if you have 7 buildings, you could develop a portfolio and under Berto. And what that means is you could focus on 1 or 2 buildings, raise the rents in 1 or 2 buildings, and the remaining buildings will benefit from the 2 buildings that you upgraded for a period of time. So it'll postpone the need to make investments in the 5 buildings that you don't upgrade.
But I think the hard case that is going to be pressed on us, and we'll have to be able to respond to it, is the single building owner or the single apartment owner, not if somebody has a portfolio, but somebody who's got 1 building and says, okay, you're asking me to spend money over time, and you've got to, I think you've articulated there are savings built into even the individual case over time. As you said, if you had to do it tomorrow, it wouldn't be easy to do because you're going to spend more than your return is. But if you take the likely increase in fossil fuel costs going forward, it will be cost effective. And part of the value of Berto is that you get the reporting of the information that enables people to make that decision on an informed basis, right? Am I hearing it correctly? And so I think part of what we're looking for is, as Councilor Getz indicated, just again to clarify the single situation, and also to talk to Councilor Kalis's point, an example like Capasso's building or maybe the housing authority, so that you can make the case that even if you just are a single unit, single owner, this is something that is not going to break your bank in addition to helping the planet, right? I mean, you've made that case, but I think it's part of the value of why we have this conversation in order to get that clear, because our colleagues on the council who are not part of this committee are going to be asking these questions. We need to be able to answer them. So,
I can present some information on
yeah,
what's going to happen with gas costs compared to heat pump operating costs.
again, I think that's part of the context of saying this is a cost-effective investment, project by project, not just by planet, or I don't know, that's a metaphor. We don't have another planet to go to. We have no planet B, that's right. Not yet. Councilor Albright, and then several members of the Energy Commission are here, and I want to just offer them an opportunity to say a word if they'd like.
So
Councilor-
just to add to that thought, Mr. Ferguson, what you have implied but not stated is that, especially now in the face of our electrification ordinance, there are going to be fewer and fewer people using gas. Therefore, the same standard cost for providing gas to our community will be borne by fewer and fewer people, which is one of the reasons why the cost of gas will be going up. And I think we need to be very explicit about that.
Yeah,
That's
exactly right. Yes.
Get on board now, or you'll be one of the 3 people left paying for the whole gas infrastructure. So that's the point that needs to be made.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. If you have $1,000 in fixed costs and there are 1,000 customers, it's $1 a customer. If you have $1,000 in fixed costs and it's $100, 100 customers, it's $10 a customer. That's what's happening with our gas system over time.
So I think it's important that people understand that.
I mean, I think that we're all trying to translate this into citizen-friendly language, you know? And that's really the part of the difficulty here.
The city councilors could make it fun. I listened to you. I think you make a great case for them.
Well, no, we gotta make the case to 16 people who don't come to this meeting. And
15.
We gotta educate not just our own committee, we gotta educate the whole council, because I think it would be very unfortunate for this man in the past with a limited support, you know?
We actually have a new.
I mean, we got electrification through virtually, not unanimously, but we got it through with a substantial majority. And, there's enough controversy around this one, that I don't want to do that. If we can lay the foundation, I'd rather take the time.
But no. It's a 1 page and
Well, we're going to do our best job to present the best case, answer all the questions factually, and make the best case for council to support Berto.
And we will, you and I and the vice chair will touch base with you beforehand. So that, again, because I'd like to move this, let's say, into September and to get it out to the council if we can, early in the fall. I can't say that there won't be another question that comes up or something that happens, because the residential is key. Councilor Albright said, but that's why I wanted to have this conversation tonight, to put those issues in front of you. Okay, any member of the Energy Commission here want to say anything? I'm glad that this is not a public comment formally, but I'm willing to offer an opportunity if anybody has it.
I think the
Or is it
case
just
study,
fine?
if I may.
No, just identify yourself for the record.
Karina Brown.
Yeah.
The case study of Unitarian Church was terrific because it has already happened, and we could document what already happened. The residential building at Lexington Street, it's something that would happen. So it has, one can, the owner, Mr. Capasa, could say, I don't believe these numbers, right? I think it will be this and that. So that will always leave uncertainty. You cannot eliminate uncertainty. We can only make it a little smaller. And anybody who is looking for a definitive final answer is going to be disappointed again and again and again. Every building is a different story. But this building we can really present, right? And we will work with Mr. Ferguson to present a really clean presentation.
Okay,
Because
and,
but that's all
that's-
anybody can do.
Yeah.
There has never been in this world a regulatory program where you could predict all the impacts. Okay, you can try your best. That's all you can do.
Yeah, but just I would ask in
Yeah.
terms of.
Councilor Getz?
Yeah, in New York, they're a little bit ahead of us. Are there not buildings that can be used as examples?
Well, there are, but the issue is.
I'm sorry, just identify.
I'm sorry. My name is Philip Answer. I'm at 40 Cedar Street. Yes, there are examples in other jurisdictions, but we want to try to make it Newton specific as possible.
Right.
Because, those have different electricity prices, different availability of gas. In the case of Manhattan, they have a dominant central district steam system. So all of those things could make it more complicated. The other thing is that whereas some of the other situations are taking account of the sort of what's the cost of alternative electricity, like in Boston. Our version of BERDO that's been proposed doesn't, and only worries about basically whether or not we're continuing to use fossil fuels going over time. And so those sorts of things make what's been proposed a simpler process and makes also the economics a little bit more clear.
So I think we, I hope, Mr. Ferguson, you got enough to get us back to a place where we can say to our colleagues, all right, this is not only good for the planet, but good for the property owner who plays into this game soon. It's actually what I'm hearing is, and from you and from others, those who say they don't want to participate are going to end up paying the bill in a way that, so the more people that get aboard, the sooner, the better off they're all going to be. So that's what I'm hearing. But maybe I'm not hearing it correctly. But I think it's almost 10 o'clock, and I generally try and make sure our committee concludes its work by 10. Any last questions from anybody from the committee or otherwise? If not, thank you, Mr. Ferguson. We'll talk about the timing, but September, one of the two meetings, we'll do this.
The only other thing, do I have
Sure,
to
yeah.
say one more thing? I would also point out that the question is not merely a question of cost. That in particular, for example, the building that Mr. Capasso has does not really have centrally air-conditioned apartments. They have, as it stands, a single unit, a single air conditioner in the apartment. So for example, if they converted over to heat pumps, they would both have air conditioning and heating that they don't currently have. So the point I want to make is if you only look at it in terms of cost, but don't also look at it in terms of the quality of the services that are being provided by these buildings or these apartment buildings and so on, it's an incomplete picture. And so there's a little bit more nuance to it than merely a sort of, here's the straight, here's what the cost looks like.
Okay.
I'm raising my hand.
And if he has centrally air conditioning.
Okay. All right.
One sec, Chair.
Excuse me, Councilor Taylor.
So I just wanted to I thought that was a very astute comment by whoever that Platel, I think it's Platel.
Hi.
By him. Yeah, I thought, yeah. So I thought that was a very good comment. I just want to make sure that Bill Ferguson, you're taking that into consideration because it isn't just about cost. It is also about what he had just talked about. And I think that's really important to reflect. So I just want to make sure that was highlighted.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilor Kalis. I appreciate it. All right, I will entertain a motion to hold this item at this point. Councilor Getz?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? The ayes have it. It's held, and we will see you again in September. All right, thank you all. I think that does it for the turn. We've been here, so. Very good.